Hello, marketers. This is the Funnel Lab. Welcome to Funnel Lab Fridays. I'm your co-host, Doug Bell, CMO of CaliberMind. Other co-host, Eric Westerkamp, CEO, is going to be joining us next week. Joining me today are Jordan Crawford, founder and CEO of Blueprint GTM, and our very own Nick Sangra, VP of Solution Architecture and a RevOps Jedi Master here at CaliberMind. Today, Jordan, Nick, and I are going to be talking about how to use data to validate your ideal customer profile, otherwise known as ICP. Welcome, Jordan and Nick. Welcome, everybody, to the show. We're going to be talking about the role of large language models versus machine learning to validate your ICP. I know it sounds like a certain amount of marketing tech speak. It's not. I promise you, as you'll see, there are very different methods that Jordan, let's call Jordan the LLM guy, and Nick, let's call Nick the machine learning guy, are going to walk us through today. So we've got sort of opposite methodologies using a form of AI, using an enabler of AI in the case of machine learning to get the same result. Jordan, welcome back. Tell us about you and Blueprint GTM. You have less than 1 minute.
Well, thanks for the intro, Doug, and thanks for having me back. I don't know what poor decisions were made internally to have me back, but I'm so grateful for them. My company basically will help you define your ICP programmatically. So help you figure out what data do you need, where does that data exist publicly, structure that data, and then use large language models to qualify that data. So you know which companies to target based on actual real live data that the LLMs go find and why to target them. And if you have those two things, you know exactly what to say to them. I hope I kept under my time limit.
I'm sorry, you're going to have to give 6 seconds back to everybody in the audience. No, that's a great summary. And Jordan, we also know that quite often you're starting with small organizations, sometimes folks really in the early days. And in many ways, you're validating that ICP by building out campaign motions. Email campaigns, LinkedIn campaigns, et cetera. So you're sort of dealing with the beginning and the end in that you're validating. Similar situation here for Nick. So Nick, I'll set you up. You successfully implemented the CaliberMind ICP within the CaliberMind platform, also connecting to Salesforce. I want to start us there. And I'm going to set you up by talking about the process that we handed to you, because it was a great process with a bit of a fuzzball that we gave Nick. But I'll do a bit of setup to describe that. But before we go there, Nick, you have a new role at CaliberMind. Will you tell us about that?
Yeah, well, first off, really excited to hear what Jordan has to say about LLMs. It's always fun to meet people where their jobs is like wouldn't exist, 5 years ago, 3 years ago. So really excited to talk to someone on the cutting edge. On the founding team at CaliberMind 8 years ago, we built out a great customer base, and I led the build out of our customer success and RevOps function. Now, as we move up market to more, very sophisticated, large, complex customers, I'm stepping into a VP of Solutions Architecture role to help navigate all the snafus, help them see around corners, and really help them adopt and implement attribution and marketing analytics. So very excited about this. Still working with customers, but spending more time geeking out around blueprinting solutions and working with data scientists like Jordan. So pretty excited about the new position.
We're excited about your new role. Folks, this is just one of our many amazing folks in the services org at CaliberMind. And Nick, thanks for sharing your expertise today. Okay, so Nick, this is one of my favorite things to talk about. And this may be I just put a giant geek flag up on my head when I said that. But what we had to do when we started working together first time in spring of 2023 is we sort of had to figure out how to better deploy marketing resources to continue the growth trajectory that CaliberMind was on. And we went through a process of using customer interviews and using revenue and marketing performance data in a room full of data people. And what we came back with was our ICP. And I have to say, it's been very clear that was a good decision. But then how do you implement that? And this happens all the time, right? You sit in a room, you get a whiteboard, you have this fantastic ICP process, and you're like, how do I go to market with this? Well, enter Nick. So Nick, I handed you, as a facilitator for this process, I should say the executive team handed you an ICP with the following boundaries. And so for anybody who's done this before, feel sympathy for Nick. So Nick, one was very easy, which was B2B. That's a lot to do with sort of the dynamics of our platform versus how B2C works. So that was the easy one. But then two things were really hard. One was you needed to be a sophisticated organization, meaning data savvy or marketing sophisticated. How do you measure for that, right? And the second piece was heavy dependence on marketing for growth. So you could be really sophisticated, but if you say, or a market dominator, or you really didn't need marketing to do anything more than branding, you probably weren't a fit. So we handed you that fuzzball. What did you do with it? I think, Nick, you wanted to show off some of the things you did in the product as well.
Yeah. Did you want to go into the product and methodology immediately, or just talk through it at this point?
Well, I think maybe let's put the screens up as background, Nick, and then you sort of walk us through the process. Here's the fuzzball. Okay. And what was your rationale and how did you approach it? And then let's take a look.
All right. So before I show some blobs of code and dive into Salesforce and CaliberMind, I'll just kind of touch on the methodology. So yeah, I think machine learning models are limited to the training data. So, Doug and the team tasked me with building this model, and some of the signals they wanted to run, on, and that interviews told us and that our customer base told us we didn't have readily available. So we had to go and make proxies for these signals. So I'll take you through that process. But a good example, marketing sophistication. Well, what could be an indicator of marketing sophistication? Well, maybe it's the number of web pixels and JavaScript tools running on their website. That's just one example. And then what are those tools? Are they buying premium, expensive ABM tools, demand-based 6 Sense, etc.? Or they have a Google Analytics free version running on their site? So you're able to tell, basically approximate how sophisticated they are and how willing they are to investigate in marketing technology. And there's also some other forcing factors. If they're too small of a company, then they're not a good fit. If they're B2C, they're not a good fit. So what does this mix ultimately look like? So as far as sharing the screen, I think our host will do that. All right. Okay. So how did we approach this? So as I mentioned, we were moving up market. And so, CaliberMind is a growing company. Say we have 100 customers. That might not be enough to train the machine learning. It also may be different customers than we want our future customers to be. A lot of our customers at the time we built this model, mid-sized businesses, and we're moving to more sophisticated. So what we did is we started out and we determined a list of, here's 2,000 customers we want to be our customers that are kind of in our target range. So generated a long list of spreadsheet, and then Doug and I manually labeled a 1 or 0. Who do we think is a good fit? And we had some methodology behind it. We know what industries, employee sizes were good fits already. We knew some of the tools they had, et cetera. So we were able to use our experience and anecdotes to determine and label which customers were a good fit. From there, we had to engineer the signals that we think are indicative of marketing complexity, sophistication, do they have B2B, et cetera. So what we did then is we took our Clearbit data. I'll show you this in Salesforce in a second. And we engineered these true-false signals for the machine learning. So here's the customers we want to sell to. Here's some customers we don't. Let's put them all on a long list. And here's some metadata about these accounts. What's their industry? What's their employee size? Do they have an ABM platform like demand-based or 6 Sense or Terminus? Do they have a B2B flag? So these true-false measures, they start from a big blob of data like this. This is Clearbit, our data enrichment provider in our Salesforce, tagging this data and implementing it. But machine learning, LLMs may do better at this, but traditional machine learning like regression analysis doesn't do well about handling a big pool of data like this. It likes ones and zeros and trues and falses. So we can flatten this data into various fields. You know, do they have, in just looking in this, I can see they have a BI tool, they have ClickView, they have analytics tools, they have this many tools all running. This is a lot of different platforms and tools.
Which, Nick, you took as a proxy for sophistication. It was like if they've got a pretty diverse, but also a set of
how many tools? Yeah, how many tools was one of the signals, but it's also a hypothesis. So we didn't know for sure. We thought that might correlate. We think that having, you know, Salesforce.com correlates, right? So what we did is we took all this data and flattened it out into signals that we thought might be interesting for the machine learning. And the ultimate goal is to bucket our accounts A, B, C, D, right? So this is a customer. And to do that, we needed to index all the scores on a 1 to 100 on a nice bell curve distribution. So we know we want to, our top 20% of scores are going to be A's, you know, the next tier will be B's and C's, et cetera. So the output of this, we're going to build a model based on this training data. So the ID of the account, was it a desired customer or not? And then these various signals. Do they have ABM? What's the length of their tech stack? We tried other signals we thought would be more predictive, like how much web traffic do they have? What's their Alexa score? But these turned out to be some of the more predictive signals. And ultimately, Google BigQuery, and this, by the way, is all under the hood in our product CaliberMind. Because it sits on top of Google, we're basically like looking in the back end of CaliberMind right now. And we're able to write just a simple query that says, I want to create this ICP model. I'm going to use a logistic regression. I want to split the data into test and training so that it can validate itself. And then I want to be able to explain it. So previously, you know, something like this would be a long Python script, you know, thousands of lines of code. Google has recently released BigQuery machine learning, so you can do it in a very simple format. So the output of this model turns into something like this. And we, as data scientists, look at all these scores and we see the accuracy, how many false positives there were in the model. You know, is the model fitting to the data well? So these scores are actually pretty good. You can see there's a high accuracy. There's a low false positive rate.
And I think that's a chromosome there on the left, right? That's a human chromosome.
Yeah, we're looking at a DNA chart. Actually.
Yeah, wow. You just mapped DNA in about 5 minutes. That's pretty impressive.
Well, so Nick, this is exactly what I was hoping we would look at and talk about today. Can I just leap us forward to from the fuzzballs? Because really, what we did is fuzzball. Nick took it, had a bunch of hypotheses in terms of what the proxies might be, and then Nick, you got through the process. And what did you hand the marketing and sales team at CaliberMind? You handed us effectively a model where we could go, here are exactly the accounts we need to market and sell to. Right. And this is how engaged they are, and which allowed us to really fine tune our multi-channel model in a way that we hadn't been able to before. All because Nick took the fuzzball that was ICP, ran it through machine learning hypotheses, and came back.
All these hypotheses, you know, really helped point it in the direction, and so the legwork to find what are the hypotheses really, I think, helped inform the model. And then I'll just show you 2 more quick screens, and then we could turn it over to the LLM side. But you know, what's neat about this type of modeling is you can actually explain the weight and the attribution of each signal to the score. So, you know, we know that if they have an ABM vendor running on their site, they're already very sophisticated. They're willing to invest, you know, 6 figures in a marketing technology solution. So that was highly predictive. And then you can see the other signals here. So ultimately what we did is we took this and we mapped it into a CaliberMind workflow. So now every new account that comes into Salesforce trickles through to CaliberMind. We enrich it with Clearbit, and then we're finally running these predictions against that model and then pushing them back to Salesforce into a nice, neat ABCD for sales. So that's how the sausage is made. You know, this is my first crack at true data science. It took me several versions to get to something we can trust and make decisions on, but pretty happy with the outcome ultimately.
Well, Nick, it was amazing work, and I have to say, it's you know, the combination of RevOps and data science. We know it's coming, so you're just ahead of the curve in many ways. Because I can't see us moving forward without RevOps people developing a certain amount of machine learning expertise. So thank you for that, Jordan. I'm going to come back over to you, and I don't think Nick actually threw a wildcat in the middle of the room, but there's a certain amount of difference here between how we and Nick approach this. Our customers have lots of data, so of course we're going to run into machine learning. But you have different use cases. Your clients are typically small. They're going to market at the same time they're validating their ICP, and at the same time, your job is to help these companies scale. So you've got a lot on your plate. So you talked recently about a project for a company who was looking for heads of trade schools, rather. So tell us about your process and how it sort of led you using Clay and Clayagents in this trade school exercise.
Yeah, I think what Nick has done is kind of amazing here, and I have learned not to touch that with 100,000 people. I kind of do the inverse here, which is let's start with the smallest possible segment that is most relevant to you, because if you do that, it's a lot easier for a human to understand both the question to ask the model and if the model is doing a good job. It's much harder. I mean, I've worked with a bunch of clients to help them take the ICP work to an entire TAM. And usually we throw a bunch of data at that where we have hypotheses. We look at that and we're like, oh, that's kind of a fit. That's not a fit. That's not a fit. It's like, oh, no. Let's not do that anymore. Let's start at the segment level. So, so what I'm going to show you before I share my screen here, you're going to understand. And by the way, the cost on this is just so cheap. So we took an entire list of cities across the country. You can just download this for free from the internet. All the cities in the country, there's like 33,000. Then what we did is we called an API called Serper, and it is 75 cents for 1,000 requests. So there's a lot of decimals there and that number per request. And so we found all of the different, he was looking for HVAC trade schools, plumbing trade schools, maybe electricians or something. There was like 9 different types of schools he was looking for. And we said, yo, take this city and find the trade shows. Then what we did is we said, great, now write all the trade schools, write all those trade schools to a different table. So transform that, write that to a new table. And then we sent an AI agent out in the world to be like, here's kind of who this company is. Here's what they do. Here's what they're trying for. Like, we gave the agent context about what we were looking for. And we said, go now find the right people that would be relevant to this. And we gave them we gave the agent some understanding of titles. And then we asked another agent to just review the work, right? So it's like we had the student do the work, and then we hired the teacher, which was just the same level as the student, to review the work, right? And then we wrote all those contacts to a new table. So so this is my pig of a process to get the
I thought that was a mic.
This is not a mic. It's a gigantic pig. Look at how big that pig is. Okay, let's take you through this here.
We're learning way more about Jordan than we wanted to here, I think.
The signals you mentioned, it was interesting how niche they are. I mean, it's, you know, has HVAC, or these are probably hard signals to find before pre tools like Clay.
Yeah, I mean, I think that Clay just makes a lot of the stuff really easier. So in this case, we just filtered down to California because we were testing. So we've got city and state here, and we use serper.dev to like find, in this case, we did HVAC Technical Institute, and we ran searches HVAC vocational training. So these are like the searches that you would run inside of Google Maps. And this array here has all the places. So it's like National Technical Institute and information about that, right? So what we then did is we just, Clay's a little silly, but we wrote all of these, all of the results of this array to a new table. So these are all the vocation schools that we came up with. So we ran just a handful of cities. We found 2,100 locations, technical school, trading school. We mapped the type, we've got the title. And then kind of most important piece is we sent an AI agent out here to go find the relevant people. So we said, hey, here's an address, here's a website, here is the title of the school, here is the type of school, here's the city, here's the state ID. And by the way, ironically, I used AI. AI is great at creating agents for AI. Like, doodle, doodle, doodle. Like, it's like anytime you think you should do work, just stop and have AI do the work that you think you should be doing, So I chatted with AI, and it's like, you're an AI agent. Here's like the context. So I gave it context of the company. Here's like here's like the goal. And I try not to be so specific there so it can make informed judgments. Here's the search parameters. These are the title that I want, like instructors, academic officers, like find at least 10 relevant contacts. Now, this was too ambitious. I probably should have said 5 here. Here's like exactly how you should go search the web. Like stop at nothing, spend at least, I like use words like this, like stop at nothing. And, when there is the first AI committed murder, like please come to my grave because I will be the person in the ground, because they'll be like, oh, he should have been a little bit nicer to generative AI. Like here's like creative search techniques. And then I said, format this as a JSON array with the name, title, email, phone, LinkedIn profile, and then the reason about why you selected this contact, right? So take a guess, Doug, Nick, how much do you think this cost me to send an AI agent world with all that kind of context? Nick, maybe you should guess.
Yeah, well, maybe Nick should guess. Yeah, go ahead, Nick.
Yeah, I don't know, 20, 25 bucks.
$25? What do you think I'm made of money? I know this pig looks expensive, but no. This is 3/10 of a penny. Wow. So 3/10 of a penny, and you can kind of see, all right, well, like there's Doug. He's the lead instructor. Perfect. Couldn't find his email. There's his phone number, but you can see the large language model is like, I can't give you the last 4 digits, right? Like that sucks. But he's got over 40 years of experience, right? So, but this is garbage, right? Like if I have only, 30, 50, 60% accuracy, like, well, what am I going to do? I thought about doing work, but instead I outsourced my work to another AI model. So I basically said, yo, here's all the work that the previous model did. Like, evaluate this work. So it's the same kind of prompt, not much has changed, but then it actually responds with a structured array. Doug, here's the phone number, lead instructor, here's like why we selected him. And then the nice thing is that, and this was even cheaper. This is 1/10 of a penny. This is, look, I can't even count that number. Is that 6/10 of 1/10 of a penny? Whoa.
That's a founder's salary after the first year.
And that's why you've never been a founder, right, Doug? Okay, good. So then I just wrote that to a people table. So now we have this people table that has a name, a phone number, a title. We've got the website. And the nice thing is that I can do a bunch of other free things in Clay. So, for example, sometimes it returns back, the large language model is like, well, I can't provide you emails. That's sensitive information. So OpenAI, Anthropic is actually much better about this. OpenAI is like, give me that sweet, sweet money. So they'll like usually just provide emails, but sometimes they'll be like, this seems like personal data. So you can just use a free Clay formula that also uses generative AI to help you. Like, look at this. No one and their mother can understand what this means. Like, I don't care how engineering you are, but like, this doesn't mean anything, right? But the nice thing is you can just say, look at this email and filter out NA rows and like never return something with stars in them. So you could use generative AI to do this, but you don't even have to. And this is free to run. So I have the ability to clean that information, so we can go from, end to end for less than a penny per row. And by the way, the interesting thing is I never had to pay a penny to any leads company, right? Like I just used it to search the web. And the key insight here, getting back to this kind of ICP versus segments, is that I think now a lot less about total addressable market scoring and trying to make sense of the entire market. With my clients, I try to do the other thing, which is what is the nichiest niche of niche segment, and where can I pull that list and run a go-to-market motion on that niche? And if you can make that work, you don't have to structure the world. You can just go niche by niche by niche and replicate, like, this is the smallest possible list to the most relevant people. And especially if you're not in B2B SaaS, which many of us, if you're not selling into B2B SaaS, which is a really hard, like, ICP to sell into, you can suddenly test much better messages because you can have higher degrees of certainty that they are, that segment is very tightly aligned. And in this case, I know, with relative high certainty, this is an HVAC technical school because Google tags that information. And the place in which I started was not find me all technical schools, which is a harder question to answer than in Los Angeles, search for the top 20 HVAC technical schools. And then I can let AI say, is this an HVAC technical school? Yes or no. And then proceed to find the contact. So I know at the end of this process that they are well qualified in that segment.
Yeah, this is, I have to say, this, every time I talk to Jordan about his process, and I've worked with Jordan for a couple of years now, I'm just always reminded of Crossing the Chasm, because, who hasn't read this book? I think we all have had to read it, but effectively a big part of Crossing the Chasm is to dominate a niche. And they sort of talk about, like, the bowling alley, and you're going niche to niche to niche. Well, this is what Jordan is doing in real time live quite often, is helping companies sort of understand a niche, but not taking 2 years to do it. You're talking about, hours, and then actually executing on that segment with marketing activity, LinkedIn campaigns, et cetera. So as the audience is seeing this, what I think the dividing line between both one method and the other is not, hey, it's not a philosophical difference. I think it has a lot to do with data. And so, Nick, as an example, I'm going to take this back to you. Our customers are big customers. We have really big brand names. We can't always mention who they are, but they're big brand names. They have big data sets. So it's a very different, we're starting with an embarrassment of riches. So Nick, can you sort of talk about what the typical large data set is we're dealing with? And Jordan, are you ever dealing with data sets? I'm going to start with Nick.
Yeah, it's garbage in, garbage out, not to sound cliche, but machine learning generally thrives well when you have enough training data. So, one of the learnings I had was, we actually didn't have enough customers to make the model good. So that's why we had to synthesize and say, all right, who are our future customers, and let's tag them and then retrain the model. So I think there's a lot of those dynamics going on at our customers where they're bringing a new product to market or going after a new industry, and they have 1 million accounts in their CRM often, 2 million plus contacts. So then a lot of it is paring that down to what's relevant to the problem we're trying to solve, and then really with the laser focus and try to, I like Jordan's methodology on creating these niches, because you're able to prove it out in one and then kind of extrapolate your learnings to others. So I think that's a cool methodology.
And Nick, you made a sort of a side comment, which is important to note, which is just because the data is there doesn't mean it has utility. Quite often, a big part of what we're doing is getting the data in a state where it has utility. And that's not just for machine learning, that's sort of general. By the way, if you're a large account out there that has that problem, it is typical, it is standard. You've had a CRM for 10 years, right. Guess what? You're gonna have bad data.
Well, and we're building a hybrid now, right, Doug? I mean, we're taking, this is a good model, but to refine this further, we're actually using Clay and some other enrichment sources to find some of these more, exotic signals that Clearbit may not have, or are out of the box, data providers. So making the models better and better, testing new hypotheses. So it's exciting to see tools like Clay to, augment what we're already doing.
Nick, I appreciate your being here. Jordan, closing thoughts for us. I was really hoping for more of a barn burner because these are such different methodologies, but you guys are so nice. You're so nice. Any parting thoughts for us, Jordan?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, look, I generally don't touch the CRM because it's a bucket of something, right? And so I really just think about let's find the nichiest of niche and start with a list that has an opinion about why a company is on that list. Like Doug, when you did the go-to-market cannonball last Saturday, we started with just the gaff roof distributors list from their website. So this is a company saying, this person sells our product. So if I go to them and I say, Doug, you sell this company's product, I can be 100% certain that that company sells that product. That is much harder to do if you take a list of 100,000 accounts and say, is this a roofing distributor? Weirdly, you would think that that would be easy to do, but that's actually a much harder question to answer. And so I think the single thing is, don't let the large language models trick you. Come in with an opinion. Hire someone like a Doug that can come in and help you make sense of the right questions to ask. And if you don't ask the right questions, the large language models will lie to you with conviction. And they will sound believable. And you need an expert to look at that and say, change that. Otherwise, it will screw you downstream. So come in with some conviction.
Yeah, I'll wrap this up, folks, and say that, you know, if we could break the world down into big companies and really, really small ones, if you're a large company, take advantage of that really massive data set that we're able to take advantage of for our clients. Like, don't ignore that data set. And then for smaller organizations, I don't know that the ICP exercise is ever going to be worth it, right? And so I love Jordan's methodology. I think it's so smart because at the end of the day, you may well determine that your product market fit is different by going sort of niche to niche. And by the way, you may develop your platform in a way that allows you to address a larger TAM or larger ICP. So Jordan and Nick, thank you for all your time. Thanks for being with us today.
Cheers. Enjoy.
All right.
Thanks.
Hey guys, that wraps up this episode of Funnel Lab Fridays. Next week, we've got Eric Westerkamp back, our normal host. Emma Pham of Maven Clinic is going to be joining us to talk about improving win rates with, guess what, guys? AI summaries for sellers. So it's everywhere in the platform these days. All right, everybody. Thanks for joining us today.
Cheers, guys.
All right, later. Bye, pig.
Bye, pig.